All right, good evening, everyone. Today is Tuesday, December 3rd, 2024. This meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck.
Here.
Councilor Verdick is excused. Councilors Boot.
Here.
Rapp.
Here.
Corrigan. Here. Afghan.
Here.
And Winland.
Here.
Thank you. Now, everyone, will you please stand, remove your hats, and join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, republic for which it stands. All right, first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone here to provide public comment? Yes, so please come forward. Hand that blue slip to Ms. Linder, if you wouldn't mind. And please have a seat and introduce yourself, and then you may begin. Oh, please.
Right now?
Yes, right now.
Okay. For about for the parking. I don't think that, okay, I don't.
Yeah, sorry, this is just general public comments, not hearing. Okay. Anyone? No. Okay. All right, then we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Move to consent to accept the consent agenda. Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes 6-0. And then we're moving on to item 7.1. This is Ordinance 2954, an ordinance of the City Council clarifying, revising, updating various articles, declaring various things. And Mr. Boone, you will tell us all about it.
Good afternoon, good evening, Mayor and Council. Evan Boone, Deputy City Attorney. I bring to you today the annual code update, and that the staff collects suggestions both from staff and from the public as to ways to improve the code, streamlining, getting rid of irrelevant items and that sort of thing. I've included in the staff report the proposed code amendments with staff commentary indicating where they came from and what the general substance is. So I would just highlight a couple of provisions that are somewhat new. First of all, code authority is being added to a number of sections to expressly declare their civil violations. I think it kind of goes without saying, but also to include an enforcement fee in addition to a fine. And that's similar to what we do now for the tree code violations. There's an enforcement fee as well. Under your business license, it would provide for a referee or a hearings referee simply to hear appeals from conditions and revocations of business licenses. Under the nuisance section, it would remove a code violation of property owners who don't keep blackberry vines and the like, such as ivy, 10 feet from the property line. Not to encourage that, but it's just staffing is not able to enforce that. It would move the driveway approach landing requirement to the engineering standards, but more importantly, to the new sections. The approach landing, which is a car when it comes off the street, can exit without going up or down, type of thing, bottoming out. It would remove the exception for single family and middle housing, because it's not really tied to the number of vehicle trips that come in and out. It creates a safety hazard. One car creates a safety hazard if it can't exit the roadway or safely. So it'd remove that for any new development. The tree code, a number of tree code amendments, but the one that's new, it would allow removal of ash trees, similar to a dead tree, from a ministerial type removal if it has evidence of infestation by the ash borer, or something like that, ash imperial borer. That is a disease condition that can affect ash trees, and so it would provide for expedited removal of the ash trees, and it would also allow to delay removal so that it's not done when the ash borer is active. So you don't want to remove the tree or burn it during infestation time. And so it addresses how you dispose of the tree. And that, Mr. Mayor and Council, is kind of the new items on it. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And any specific questions, we have representative department here.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Does anyone have any questions? I just have one question. Are there any of these fees, violation, enforcement fees that would be new fees that we haven't done before?
No, your enforcement fees are provided for are currently under the master fees and charges. And that was established, I think, 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
But this provides specific code authority for it.
I was just thinking, like, if there's fees, we haven't, like, publicized that it's new fees, that we should let people, I don't know if there's a
No,
process. for,
as I
like,
say,
letting people know.
those have been in place for about 2 years, and this just provides this express code authority for it.
I wonder if we let, but 2 years, we let people know, we communicate, like, oh, there's a fee if you don't do this.
Code enforcement is very good at letting folks, and remember, we first approach it in terms of education and then compliance, and then only then about enforcement. So code enforcement is really good about making sure folks understand the financial consequences of failure to comply, as well as the other things that could happen.
Good. Okay.
It's not a general fee that's imposed, only for people who are violating, we believe, who are violating the ordinance, and we let them know individually.
Okay. Well, would someone like to make a motion to approve this ordinance?
Move to approve ordinance 2954.
All right, moved by Councilor Mboop and seconded by Councilor Corrigan. Any discussion? All right.
I would just say that I think this is my 6th time that we've done this, and this is the most concise group, so we must be getting most of our loose ends
Yes, we are.
here.
We
So
are.
congratulations to the legal team. I think it's very impressive that we have, it's not 400 pages long like it has been in previous years. So well done.
Second that. It was very easy to understand.
Yeah.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes 6-0. Thank you, Mr. Boone.
I think I'm the next item.
Oh, and you're next too. Oh, my gosh. What a delight. Okay, so now we have our, moving into our public hearings. This is resolution, our first one under consideration is Resolution 24-47, a resolution amending Lake Oswego Public Contracting Rules 46-0131, special procurement, and 46-140 regarding delegation of authority to the city manager to enter into public contracts and enter into intergovernmental agreements. We will begin this hearing with a review of the procedures by Ms. Osnack.
Thank you, Council. This public hearing involves a legislative policy decision, which is in the sound discretion of the City Council. The public comment or hearing process will begin with a presentation by staff, Mr. Boone, of course, and then testimony can be received from the public, subject to the time limits set forth in the agenda, which are 5 minutes per person, and other organizations get 10. The clock timer will let you know if you want to testify when your time is up by showing a yellow then a red light. And at this point, I'll ask if councilors have any financial conflicts of interest related to this item. None, we're ready.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Similar to the annual code amendments, we kind of keep an eye on the public contracting rules when they might need updating. The proposal today has one essential public contract amendment and then two which are more process-oriented and not really public contract rule amendments, but anyway, here they are. The first public contract rule would exempt legal and related services from competitive bidding. As laid out in the staff memo, it's the related services typically come when you're in the middle of litigation and you're not going to seek competitive bids for dictation services or expert services or something like that. Sometimes you have to, say, an arbitrator, you're splitting the cost of the arbitrator, so you're not going to go out and solicit bids for an arbitrator. They're selected differently. As far as legal services, this would exempt the competitive solicitation process from legal services. They have, frankly, over time, they're problematic because you never know how much legal services you're going to need. You end up employing an attorney, perhaps on a short-term basis, and then the case may develop on. So this would allow the selection of legal staff, consulting outside legal staff, to provide assistance to the city attorney's office for cases. And those are then selected by the city attorney based upon references, expertise, and field. Okay. Also included is sort of housekeeping measures. There's a delegation authority, which would increase the council's delegation to the city manager from $250,000 to $500,000. And basically, I would call it like a Scrivener's error on intergovernmental agreements. It currently authorizes the city manager to enter into intergovernmental agreements to purchase goods from other agencies up to the certain dollar amount. This would also allow to sell goods to other governmental agencies.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Boone? All right. We'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Is there anyone here that would like to testify on this matter? All right. Seeing no one, go ahead and close the public hearing and entertain a motion on Resolution 24-47.
Move to adopt Resolution 24-47.
All right, motion made by Councilor Wendland and seconded by Councilor Corrigan. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes 6-0. Okay, next public hearing. This is item 8.2. This is Ordinance 2949. This is an ordinance of the city amending the Economic Vitality Chapter of the Comprehensive Plan, the Connected Community Chapter of the Comprehensive Plan, the First Edition Forest Hills Neighborhood Plan, the Foothills Special District Plan, the Lake Grove Village Center Plan, the Merrillhurst Area Special District Plan, LOC 50.03.003 Use-Specific Standards, 50.03.005 Temporary Structures and Uses, 50.05.004 Downtown Redevelopment Design District, 50.05.007 Lake Grove Village Center Overlay District, 50.06.002 Parking, 50.06.003 Circulation and Connectivity, 50.06.004 Site Design, 50.07.005 Review Procedures, 50.07.004 Additional Submission Requirements, 50.07.005 Conditional Use Permits, 50.08.001 Introduction to Variances. Wait till you get beyond the introduction. 50.10.003 Definitions and Adopting Findings. This is LU 24-0025. We will start again with a review of the hearing procedures by Ms. Oswego. Big title.
Yes, Mayor Buck, members of the council, we all applaud you for that very lengthy ordinance recitation. And for the benefit of the members of the public in the record, this is a public hearing that involves a legislative policy decision, which is in the sound discretion of the city council. Although there are certain criteria that must be applied, and you'll hear about those from staff, which is how our public hearing is going to begin. Testimony will then be received from the public. Individuals are allowed up to 5 minutes. Recognized neighborhood associations, homeowner associations, government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations will be allowed up to 10 minutes. The time limit shall not include time taken up by questions from the council or responses to such questions. Any person in attendance may cede his or her time for testimony to another person, but in no case shall any person's testimony be increased to greater than 10 minutes. As before, I'll ask if there are any financial conflicts of interest related to these comprehensive plan amendments. Seeing none, we're ready for the staff report. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Olson.
Right. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Eric Olson, Long Range Planning Manager, as you all know. Here tonight for the public hearing on citywide parking reform, or the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules and the city's response. So this will be a much briefer presentation than my previous ones. You know, we've covered this a lot. We've gotten into a lot of these details, but I just kind of want to, give you a little bit of a overview. So, you are likely very familiar with these rules, the Climate-Friendly and Equitable Communities, or CFAC rules. We've already complied with the first two components here, Phase A of the parking requirements, as well as the EV charging related requirements. Really, we're talking about Phase B of the parking requirements that the city is required to implement to adopt by December 31st of this year. The next component will be an update to the transportation systems plans, which we've been informed by the Department of Land Conservation and Development will get started in 2029. They've asked us to wait until 2029. So as, again, we've discussed quite a bit here, there were 3 different options for the city to comply with Phase B of the parking requirements for CFAC. There were 2 options that we refer to as either the fair parking or the parking management approaches. We had discussed those. There's a lot of complication involved with all of those, a lot of potential costs that would be translated over to businesses and could be kind of incurred through those different approaches. Option one is much more straightforward and involves a full repeal. Of course, we have discussed this before. We have discussed this with council, and there has been a unanimous preference for option one in our previous discussions. So really, this is a similar approach that other cities in Oregon have taken so far. At least 8 of the cities that are compliant with CFAC so far have selected option one. And as you can see, that's the off-street parking requirements table that would be removed from the code if we move forward with this option. Here's just an overview of the schedule. We've been talking about this for some time. We received the sort of first round of rulemaking back in, I think, 2021 it was, and complied by early 2022 for that Phase A piece, and have been kind of working on this ever since. So as you can see, we did quite a lot of work, a lot of Planning Commission work sessions and City Council study sessions to discuss the finer details here, and some more recent work over the summer to talk about the actual draft comprehensive plan and community development code amendments before we put them out for public hearing draft in the fall. And of course, we're here today at the council hearing on December 3rd. The public engagement and outreach for this project has been fairly, targeted, I suppose, in some ways, but it's been fairly, robust, and considering the sort of scope of the project and the sort of, the amount of sort of decision-making sort of flexibility that the city has, there really isn't much. But we're wanting to go out there and talk to people about this and hear the concerns and sort of make sure folks are aware. So we've maintained a project website, of course, the email list that we've put out a lot of information through. Had a sort of general information FAQs page on the website, as well as 4 different work sessions at the Planning Commission, 4 different study sessions at Council, articles in the Hello LO, community forum event that we hold over the summer, as well as targeted outreach presentations to a wide array of groups that you can see on the screen, including most recently the Neighborhood Chairs Committee and the 3 neighborhood associations, Lake Forest, Lake Grove, and Waluga, that are located at least partially within the Lake Grove Village Center overlay area. So we've proposed comprehensive plan and code amendments. Those are included in the package that you received. Really, a big piece of this is kind of just codifying what had previously been implemented directly via state rule for Phase A of the parking piece and the electric vehicle charging requirements. So instead of sort of looking at the state rule, we're putting them in the code through, more or less, through our proposed amendments. There's also, obviously the parking Phase B related amendments. We're complying with state rules related to the exemption for communities without parking mandates through our selection of option one. And there's some other pieces related to parking regulation improvements and parking maximum requirements that I will talk about in the coming slides. So with respect to our proposed parking maximum or maximum parking regulations, we did make some changes as part of the proposed community development code amendments. Ultimately, this included a decrease to the maximum parking permitted for multifamily residential in parking area A, which is really just the sort of area on the eastern side of the city, sort of within a half mile of bus line 35, as well as the area essentially within a half mile of the Lake Grove Village Center overlay. So that is sort of where this will apply. Basically, this is a decrease. We currently don't have any maximum parking requirements for multifamily residential. This was one of the sort of pieces that was not optional for CFAC. We had to sort of institute these maximum parking requirements. Just point out that detached single-family dwellings, middle housing, and multifamily residential uses outside of parking area A and what we've called area B would continue to not have any maximum parking limitations. In terms of commercial uses, really the biggest change is to office uses. We're instituting a decrease again to the maximum parking allowed for office based on actually the metro maximum parking requirements table that we must comply with as a city within the Portland metro area. That involves a decrease to 3.4 spaces per 1,000 square feet of office use within that parking area A and 4.1 spaces in parking area B per 1,000 square feet. And there's a modest decrease to the number of parking spaces required for barber shops, allowed rather, the maximum amount of parking that we would allow for barber shops, beauty salons, and personal care services. We did some sort of cleanup in the maximum parking table, tried to make it a little bit more related to the actual uses as they're listed in the use table. Really, what we did for almost all of the other commercial uses and all the uses you see listed here on this slide was we increased the maximum parking allowance. So while it didn't, really we were required to lower it for the uses I just explained, we did increase it for a lot of uses as well, as you can see on this slide. We also, as was required under CFAC, have some parking limitations for extremely large buildings. So those that are more than 65,000 square feet of floor area essentially are limited to providing parking at the same sort of amount of square footage as the floor area of the building. We also do not apply maximum parking regulations to non-surface parking, such as tuck under parking or underground or subsurface parking structures. And we exclude uses per both metro and state rule requirements. We're excluding fleet parking, vehicle parking for sale, lease, or rent, carpool and vanpool parking, and ADA parking from maximum parking regulations. One piece that I wanted to just kind of briefly pause on that we will need to follow up with DLCD on is related to this requirement to allow and encourage redevelopment of underutilized parking for other uses. When it comes to the code amendments piece, because we don't have any minimum parking requirements, we comply with this for on-street parking, but we did receive guidance from, or a letter from DLCD that outlined that there would be further policy action needed for on-street parking spaces. So that's a conversation we don't intend to have this evening, but is going to require the city to adopt some sort of policy related to the conversion of on-street parking spaces to other uses. So that's something we'll be back to talk to you about in the relatively near future. Yes, on-street parking. So that's something that, again, we didn't necessarily catch for these code amendments, but it is something that DLCD has flagged that we'll have to, sort of adopt something on. A lot of questions there. So again, we'll be back to talk about that a little bit more with council. Other than that, though, we will be more or less, compliant with everything else. So again, I wouldn't get too caught up on that. We will, again, talk about that later, but I just wanted to flag it. A lot of the regulations that we've included here, some of the biggest pieces are related to new surface parking lots over ½ acre in size. I'm going to talk about the baseline requirements first. So just in terms of these larger parking lots, they are required to allow either a minimum of 30% tree canopy coverage just as a baseline, or trees along driveways. We expect that most developments will decide that trees along driveways are an easier way to comply with this standard, but it is a choice. And that's reflected in the proposed code amendments. We also are requiring, per the rules, that these new surface parking lots have pedestrian connections that connect a number of things. This is similar to language we already have in the code, but the biggest change is making sure that accessible parking spaces are connected via these pedestrian connections. That's kind of the biggest change. So, there are some tree planting standards that must be followed, as well as coordination with local electric utilities that we included for plans that must show that they comply with these tree canopy standards. So there are, these are sort of statewide sort of minimum requirements, again, for CFAC. The piece that we might want to talk about a little bit more relates to what they call climate mitigation actions for these ½ acre or larger new surface parking lots. What we had originally proposed was 3 different options, and that applicants could select one of those 3 to comply. Either the provision of on-site solar panels, so they would have to have a generation capacity of at least 0.5 kilowatts per parking space, per new parking space. The option B would be to pay into a renewable energy fund for $1,500 per on-site parking space. And C would be to provide tree canopy over the parking area. At least 40% of that new parking area would expect it to be covered within 15 years of their planning, or at maturity within 15 years. So it's meant to be at maturity, but it is specifically within 15 years. So I would just point out, we Had some discussion at this in the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission ultimately did not recommend including option B within this sort of climate mitigation action provision of the code for these new surface parking lots. I think the real rationale there was that these investments into the Renewable Energy Fund would not be spent within the jurisdiction of Lake Oswego. We would have no guarantee of that, so there was concern. I think there were only 4 commissioners in attendance at the hearing, and 2 of them felt strongly about this being excluded, and 2 of them felt that it should be included. I think the argument for inclusion of this option B would be just to provide a bit more flexibility, particularly considering that both A and C involve actually dedicating space on the site itself to these climate mitigation actions that could be taken, that might take up space that could be used for the development, otherwise for what they're proposing to construct there. So, I think just wanted to point out that there was actually a split sort of within the Planning Commission on that issue. Although, again, they didn't ultimately recommend including that option B. So, we really want to bring that back up at the council here, given that, there is, that there are some benefits to investments in renewable solar and wind energy outside of the jurisdiction of Lake Oswego that could still really serve to benefit us here within the jurisdiction, as well as sort of to point out that this could be fairly limiting, and the option B would really allow for some additional flexibility for developments that include this amount of parking, new parking. So with that being said, we do have 2 recommended motions here, sort of depending on your stance on that option B, whether we should include the payment in lieu or not for consideration here. And I will conclude my presentation, but happy to answer questions and talk through the sort of different alternative motions here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Well, we will go ahead and a great presentation. We will go through our public testimony, then we'll have you come back up and we'll pepper you with
Lots of questions.
tons of questions. Thank you, Carrie. Folks, if you're here to testify on this and you have not already done so, please fill out one of these blue forms located on the back table and hand it to Miss Linder. Now, do we have someone on the Zoom that wants to? We'll have our Zoom. Deborah Link. Miss Link, is that how you say your name?
That's exactly how you say my name. I'm Deborah Link, and I'm a resident of Lake Oswego in First Edition. And thank you very much, Mayor Buck, councilors, for having the hearing. I'm sorry, a little bit late to the game, but some of this occurred while I was trying not to die from COVID. So anyway, I wanted to cede my time to Brenna Vaughn, that she is in attendance, and I am on travel. So, thank you.
Okay, Brenda Vaughn. All right, well, Brenda Vaughn, here you are. Okay, well, thank you, Miss Link. Wonderful. Okay, Brenda Vaughn. Hi. Please go ahead and introduce yourself, and then you may begin.
Hi, my name is Brenna Vaughn, and just to clarify, do I have 10 minutes since she ceded her time to me?
10 minutes. Yeah, we do that. Yes, go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor Buck, councilors, staff. My name is Brenna Vaughn. I'm a resident of First Edition, and I appreciate you letting us come tonight to talk. I ask that the City Council first visit the sites that I'm mentioning to fully understand the concerns that I will be raising tonight before making a final decision. First, I am a real estate investor myself. I am a mother of 3 and a clean energy advocate. I am concerned, just as you are, about the impact of climate change and the need to reduce emissions and our carbon footprint, as well as providing middle housing in our community. The proposed changes to the parking provide no context that recognizes that not every neighborhood is the same. We've heard from major real estate investors in the Portland area that unless parking is associated with middle housing in Clackamas County, the units will not be attractive to buyers or financing institutions. This common advice on cottage clusters in particular is to proceed with caution, if at all. Sobering advice from no developers. And I sit on the board of directors for Investor Lab, which is the major real estate meetup group in Portland. So they met on November 9th, and that's where that came from. This revision to our parking code responds to an executive order rules generated by a state agency and a newly enacted, untested state law. The earlier lawsuit brought by Oregon cities in opposition to the executive order and rulemaking was lost on a technicality regarding to how broad the objections were. directing cities to change the fundamental tenets of their communities and demanding that all properties be made available to middle housing, affordable housing violates home rule. Insisting that all parking requirements be removed in the name of climate protection and housing availability violates home rule in terms of public safety and represents an unlawful taking of property rights. What seems affordable to a California immigrant remains unaffordable to an Oregon resident. About half the people relocating to Oregon are from California. I've seen firsthand the love affair that our Californians have with their cars, and so it's misleading to believe that they're going to leave their cars behind. Assuming that people within a quarter mile of a bus line will give up their cars is unrealistic either. Primary bus service to Lake Oswego is via routes 35 and 78, neither of which is a frequent service line with service about every 15 minutes, and both routes have faced service cuts. The lack of circulator buses here in town is another consideration. Without a car, no way exists to get around the various neighborhoods in Lake Oswego absent a local circulator bus system. This means that residents drive their own cars or hire a rideshare service to get to local shopping areas, businesses, and health services. Prior to living in Lake Oswego, we lived in the forested high country of Colorado. And my mother was a Red Cross volunteer who saw firsthand the devastation limited ingress and egress had during a 100,000-acre wildfire in our state. I noted at the time when we moved to Lake Oswego, while the streets were very narrow in First Edition, there was generally adequate on-site parking at the homes and businesses which would allow emergency vehicles to access the area. First Edition was platted in 1888, and the streets are narrow and no consideration was made with those old Model T Fords. As I read the changes proposed to the parking code, I'm also very concerned over the neglect of safety requirements in the proposal. I'll give you a specific example. There's an 8-unit cottage cluster which is currently in the permitting process at 233 East Street on a quarter-acre lot originally intended for one small home. The developer proposes no parking. Directly across the street, another cluster of homes remains in pre-application with 8 to 10 homes at 310 G Avenue, 804 and 816 3rd Street with limited parking spots. It's disingenuous to believe that these 18 homes will have no vehicles. There will be 18, more likely 36, maybe more. And when these cars park around the exterior of these new developments on these very narrow streets, the effective street width narrows considerably. When cars park on both sides of E or G Street, which borders the 233E property, 2 oncoming cars cannot safely pass, let alone a fire truck. Let me be very clear, a fire in Tryon Creek can only be accessed on G and F Avenues. In a wildland fire, we're not talking about 1 or 2 fire trucks, we're talking about dozens plus heavy equipment. My brother was a longtime firefighter, and I saw how carefully the fire departments he worked with considered safety. I'm surprised that this issue has not arisen in the reassessment and revision of the parking codes and approval process other than for designated fire lanes around commercial and government office buildings. Are we to leave the residents, my neighbors, and my family's houses to burn? In addition, the concern regarding fire safety. Safety during construction remains troubling. The volume of heavy, wide equipment, construction workers, and vehicles necessary to build these clusters staggers the imagination. In order to assure neighborhood safety, have the construction workers use the public transportation system or park remotely in designated sites. I believe that the development code should be modified to take into account the safety implications of unplanned parking. It's within the city's purview to exact a parking assessment to fund public parking similar to the storm drainage assessment. The city can designate the time limits for on-street parking and issue a 1-car per home permit for street parking in the area, fining and towing vehicles that are non-compliant. Additionally, the city can ration the time limits for on-street parking with fines and towing consequences for non-compliance. There's also the option of denying non-emergency vehicles access on those streets to assure public safety. I talked to several people in local government who all said that Lake Oswego has its hands tied because of these regulations. While I recognize the state mandate, I believe that these regulations are short-sighted and untested in considering implications for public safety. I researched past rulings, in particular LeGrand versus Astoria, and would ask that Lake Oswego take a measured, detailed look at local safety implications because local public safety is the responsibility of the city, not the state under home rule. In the face of aggressive state regulations, we should be working together in cooperation with the city to help you study and examine the fundamental charter legal foundations for your decisions on parking, along with innovative structural answers to the problem. While the thinking when the state regulations were written, it was that the lender would require parking, I suspect that some, if not many, of the new developments will be funded through private equity, thus negating the possible balancing requirement. I've seen it through my real estate investing. There needs to be space held for early collaboration on parking concerns that results in satisfactory good neighbor solutions for both the developer and the affected neighborhoods and neighborhood association. For the immediate problems at hand, a pre-application consultation with the neighborhood associations prior to the application filing provides the developer with important community input about their pre-proposal. This model allows for room for an open discussion of parking and a meaningful dialogue about the impacts to the neighborhood and public safety as developers are considering building in Lake Oswego. Nothing precludes language in the parking code that suggests working with neighbors or associations to assure a parking approach that works for the developer and those in the area. While considering the fundamental legal responsibilities for public safety, I would like the Planning Commission to consider a process change that specifically encourages this type of good neighbor solution on a robust and meaningful early dialogue to address public safety and parking concerns early in a spirit of cooperation. In summary, I'd like to request the following 4 things. The council visits the sites I mentioned in first edition and sees for yourself the impacts that these parking decisions will have on our community. 2, add language in the parking code which encourages the process that results in good neighbor solutions and addresses safety considerations. 3, the council review the issues of home rule regarding public safety and local community context. 4, immediately initiate parking management tools to assure neighborhood safety during construction and emergency events. Finally, I want to thank Lake Oswego staff who've worked on these complicated issues. Everyone I've dealt with has been extremely well-versed and helpful, which is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gail Van Leeman. Oh, no, yes. Now it is the time.
Now it's my time.
Thanks, Ms. Van Leeman. Please introduce yourself and then you may begin.
Okay. Hi, my name is Gail Van Leeman, and I live at 790 3rd Street, which is directly across from the 2 upcoming developments. I've lived in this almost 100-year-old cottage for 22 years and have seen the neighborhood change a lot. I've raised my 3 sons there, and I've always been extremely diligent in trying to keep an eye on the safety of all of those in the neighborhood. E Avenue is definitely a cut-through street from Highway 43, with those attending and commuting to Forest Hills Elementary, the library, and also the Adult Community Center. We are, as my previous speaker has said, a community where our roads are narrow, we have alleys, and we have a few sidewalks here and there. For many years, we thought we were also going to have sidewalks along E Avenue the way that they had then come up on D Avenue, but that never happened. We also proposed, and I've written letters over the years, to try to have additional stop signs placed on E Avenue for the safety of our walkers, bikers, drivers, and all others who are walking through our neighborhood. Those never were added. So with everything that's happening, where the current 4 homes are going to become up to 18 homes with extremely limited or no parking, of course, my concern and my neighbors is the safety of the community. First of all, that is absolutely the most important. The congestion and other concerns, of course, how it will change the nature of the community is obviously something we think about. Those of us who spent the extra money to be able to move into a neighborhood like First Edition, really it was something that we know it would change through the years, but this dramatic change that is happening in our neighborhood with one development directly next to the other, and the parking issue is something we're all concerned about. So I'm here at this meeting to hear a bit more about what the council has to say and my fellow neighbors. And again, looking at the issue of, can we please add more parking provisions and safety concerns such as stop signs, to our particular neighborhood. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Bill Savage?
While Mr. Savage is coming up, can I have a point of order?
Oh, sure. Yes, of
Mayor,
course, Ms. Osa.
For the benefit of the public and also the council, there's been some discussion about a specific application for middle housing, and that application is actually under appeal at the DRC. So I wanted to let you all know that, and the public to let you know that council is not permitted to discuss that specific development, and to the extent that you all are testifying about it, they cannot take that into consideration because they will ultimately potentially be a body that's sitting in appeal. So I wanted to make that clear to everyone. No one's done anything wrong, but I needed to make clear for the record and for council that that's not something that you all are able to talk about specifically, but of course you can in general talk about the concerns that were raised and your own perception about what these parking requirements are.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Osnek. Appreciate that. Mr. Savage, good evening.
Thank you, Mayor Buck and members of the council. My name is Bill Savage. I live at 804 2nd Street. I've owned the property now for about 18 months, and we've been living there continuously for about 12 months. I would echo the concerns of the prior two speakers who you've heard from before. I will just add a few observations. I'm an attorney. For the first 12 years of my law practice, I was an active criminal defense attorney with that background for whatever it's worth. I have concerns with the number of cars that are likely to be parked on the street as a result of these two developments. They don't provide, in my opinion, for sufficient off-street parking. I have concerns about increased vandalism in the neighborhood because of this increase in parking along the street. I have concern about whatever curbside activities cars parked on the street might encourage, such as drugs and, whatever else may happen in cars parked along the street. Congestion, of course, is a concern. I think this will degrade the livability in First Edition for adjoining neighbors and for those who enjoy biking, walking around, dog walking in the community. The emergency services access, I think, is a big issue. The streets are narrow. We had an issue somewhat that caused my wife and I to go and talk to the planning department here and learned that the right-of-way, actually the city has along streets in Lake Oswego, is pretty broad and broader than you might possibly imagine. However, a number of neighbors, property owners in First Edition, have now placed large rocks adjacent to the roadway, meaning what? Meaning the cars can't park there. There's going to be even more congestion because of the more limited parking that's only available on the street. And I can imagine readily that with an increase in parking as envisioned here, a fire truck is not going to be able to get through, maybe not even an ambulance. So it's a very serious issue, particularly given the demographics, from my perception, of who lives in First Edition, generally speaking, and the proximity of the senior community center.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who'd like to testify? Okay, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing, and we'll ask Mr. Olson to please come back up to the table. And colleagues, now's the time for questions of Mr. Olson. If you have any questions. Councilor Corrigan, lead us off.
My question is, can you explain to us how we protect how right-of-way for emergency vehicles? How will we do that?
Well, we would do that the same way that we do currently. When a development is proposed, it is reviewed for sort of compliance with our fire access and safety requirements, and nothing about this proposal would necessarily change those. There might be more use of the parking within the right-of-way theoretically, but we can have, luckily we have City Engineer Erica Rooney here that could talk a little bit more about those requirements, but they would continue to be applied in the same way they are currently, and I think we'd have a keen eye on the potential, use of those rights-of-way and sort of the, making sure that there is sufficient access, assuming that those will be utilized. Yeah.
I have another question, which is it possible to do temporary parking rules during construction? Is that legal?
I am not certain, but I believe that some temporary rules are allowed. You know, obviously there is construction, so you're not allowed to park at the site for the most part, but I can't go into as much detail about that.
Or just to clarify your question, do you mean while someone is under construction, your question is, does the city have the legal authority to limit on-street parking, or is that kind of your question?
Yeah, right, to in some way manage the congestion that comes with construction projects.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Erica Rooney, Public Works Director, City Engineer. We do already have in place requirements for during construction that if the contractors need to use the right-of-way for certain activities, they need to do construction in there, they do need to get permits from us. But with all construction, you know, there is definitely congestion that occurs. And in all cases, no matter how many vehicles show up and where they park, they all still need to park legally. So, and we have had challenges here and there when there's a lot of activity and they don't follow the rules, we get involved, and or more effectively, the police get involved regarding keeping the roads open, not parking illegally, things like that. So that happens today already, and those tools are still going to be available to us.
Maybe to follow on Councilor Corrigan's questions, you know, the gentleman, Mr. Savage, was talking about the rocks, you know, in the right-of-way. And I know we've talked about these rocks over the years, you know, and none of us like the rocks. They shouldn't be there, right? What are we doing about the rocks? People blocking the right-of-way with rocks.
Well, I think you guys are going to be having a study session relatively soon that you asked for about how do we manage encroachments in the right-of-way. The rocks are not the only encroachments in the right-of-way all over town, and I think we're going to need some policy level guidance, because the truth is, at our current level of code compliance staff or engineering staff, we don't have the capacity to self-initiate enforcement. So right now, if we get a complaint, we'll go investigate and we'll deal with the complaint. But right now, we don't proactively go out and remove obstacles from the right-of-way, except for vision clearance and other sort of obstacles to traffic safety devices. But
So if a neighbor in First Edition called and said, hey, there's some big boulders in the right-of-way.
yeah, and of course, neighbors are often reluctant to do that because they're complaining about other neighbors, and so.
But they could do
They
that,
could do
and we
that.
would respond to it.
We would.
Okay. Yeah, that is one issue that I don't think, you know, it's a good one to bring up, because with, you know, the reliance more so on the on-street parking, folks taking it over, putting no, you know, homemade no parking signs, putting the big boulders in place and other barriers to parking is not going to be workable. Councilor Afghan.
Mr. Mayor, I know this is not my turn, but
well, it is your turn.
Thank you. There were a couple of comments about parking on the street or those kind of obstacles. This very specific topic was in existence in Old Town neighborhood, where we have narrow streets, and on hot days when George Rogers Park had a lot of visitors parking on both sides, fire engine may not be able to get through. So before I was a city council, we connected with the city traffic engineer, walked him through the area, and there were some decisions made that improved the neighborhood movability drastically. And there were areas where property owners had actually taken over by putting signs up that you can't park here, or these are parking permits, and those signs were removed, and the concerns that were brought up has a solution to it that the city has already implemented in certain neighborhood and can be duplicated in First Edition if those are the only concerns. Thank you.
Virginia here. Thank you, Councilor Afghan. Councilor Moop.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric, and all the folks. I've been talking to many people from the neighborhood. Some, like our city attorney said, there are things we cannot talk about because we'll be bound to maybe recuse ourselves if we do. But I understand really like the concern of the people that, you know, you don't want to live in a neighborhood where you're scared that when you have an emergency that the ambulance would not come, or that when there is a fire. I talked to a lady, it was after one of our planning commission. We stayed a while and she raised concerns that I really were not even aware of. And she talked about Denver, I think Colorado, where things like this happen, and it was really bad. And I just said, you know, since we have Eric, and who I really like a lot on the way he conducts his work and understand, what would be your response to all this? Because really these folks, they have concerns. And I think policies and politics just make sense if it is for the good of the people. We just like, I'm not talking about the development and all that, you know, 18, it's not what we're talking about, but it's just like, we cannot, it hurts me sometimes. I feel for our neighbors when they have concern and come to us. I'm not an engineer, I cannot respond. But the good news is Lake Oswego have wonderful folks that we trust and rely on. Well, what would be your response to this concern? Like, is because I know that the state is coming hard on us. And by December, we have to respond to what the state is asking us to do. And I differ with one of the speakers who said that we can go without. Like, no, the state is the one that decide, and we have to do this. But on our way, we have maybe ways, we have creativity to make sure that these concerns are, what would you respond to them? I just wanted to know.
Yeah, I just would point out that nothing about, the use of the right-of-way for parking is intended to limit emergency vehicle access. So I think that's something that the city is going to need to be, again, more, aware of perhaps than previously, but it's not something that we don't review right now. And so it's something that, I guess I would lead by saying, we wouldn't approve anything that would violate that clear access, and in no way we intend to, sort of make it such that emergency vehicles or fire apparatus cannot, move through these areas freely. And that's what we currently have in our regulations. We do have standards and code that addresses this currently. And, what we're proposing right now really wouldn't change that. It would allow for a more efficient use of the right-of-way for parking, perhaps. But for the most part, there isn't, it might be more of an enforcement issue, I suppose, as opposed to what's in the code and what we're talking about in terms of parking requirements. So, I think there are certainly things that the city can do, and I think, we talked for a while about, we're going to have to see what this looks like when it's, when we see it implemented. We still haven't necessarily seen these developments come to fruition. It would be certainly something, we understand those concerns, but once we actually see what's happening out there, there are parking management approaches, as was suggested by one of the speakers earlier, that could potentially help to assuage these concerns, as well as enforcement of encroachments in the right-of-way, as already has been discussed. That would be a really effective tool, particularly in certain sort of acute areas where this problem exists.
Thank you.
I think then that is something that we've discussed here on the dais in terms of, especially in regards to first edition, where we see that potential spillover effect to be the most pronounced. But we also know that, implementing parking management is not a simple process. It's not a cheap process. It's a difficult one that, a path we only want to go down if it's really needed. But it's something that we're definitely going to be monitoring as time proceeds forward. Okay, Councilor Wendland.
I think council knew that this night was going to come. We have been working on what they call the housing production strategy for, gosh, I don't know, since we were in kindergarten, it seems like. It's been 3 or 4 years. I like to call it the housing production mandates, because it's less of a strategy, it's more of a Salem, this is what you will do, or we will take away all your rights. And I just want to let the community know up front that we were given a choice as a city to just take the housing production strategy from Salem and just put it into our codes as they wrote it. We decided as a city that we would do everything we could to help take that strategy and minimize the impact on Lake Oswego and our citizens, and to ensure that we were doing the best we could to represent our city's interests. The unfortunate thing is that there's very little leeway that they gave us, but we have spent tremendous resources. Eric is one person who is, he is the king of housing production strategy implementation and has spent the majority of the last few years on this topic, along with a number of other staff members, along with council, and we are doing everything we can to help make sure that Lake Oswego is the least impacted from this measure, while still following some of the guidelines of increasing our housing availability in Lake Oswego. The unfortunate thing is our hands were really pretty much tied and we were given very few decisions. We did go through this whole exercise to try to prevent some of the issues that are now coming to fruition now that we have real examples that are being built and that are happening. And I assure you, this council has been looking at every decision that we make to make sure that we're trying to do the best thing for Lake Oswego. And we will do the best we can, but just know that we have limited options and our hands are tied with making local decisions. And we're all big home rule fans on this dais. We feel that we can manage our city and make our policies in this city and run our city far better than other people that are maybe 45 miles south of us. But we are part of a state that gets to make those decisions for us. And so while there are some now real examples out there that are starting to happen, it's going to be interesting to see how they're implemented. And we can't comment certainly on specific projects. We can comment, I think, and I know our city attorney will stop me if I can't, we can figure out the best ways to strategize to make the least impact to our community and to make sure that we're safe and that we are following a level of concern of our citizens and implementing it into the policies that we can. I guess I have one question that was brought up in the testimony. Are there any other entities, cities in Oregon that are challenging some of the rules of the housing production strategy? And if so, have they been successful in pushing back, you might say, or litigating? I don't know.
There was a legal challenge filed by a handful of cities to CFEC, but as Ms. Vaughn testified, they lost. So the rules are in effect.
Okay. So far there's no wiggle room of something out there that might be in the gray area? There's an election in 2 years. That is true. Right. Right.
Yeah, it takes a while, but the gas tax revenue is substantial.
Mm-hmm. No, we can't live with being an island, but I just wanted to know if there's other people that were, and again, elections are elections, and if you look at the governor's budget that's proposed, they are still investing heavily in housing production. So this is still on the legislation and the governor's, one of their top, I think it's their top priority. Houselessness is next, and then education is third. So those are the three priorities of our Salem government. So choose wisely. And I guess my last comment is from the standpoint of once things happen where we put in the production, is there the chance that we could do any revisions as we move forward? What would be the way to, whenever they come out with policy, there's always cause and effect and there's unintended consequences. What would be a strategy that we could use to help mitigate some of the concerns?
Well, I think it's a great question. And I think certainly what you heard about earlier tonight is what I think of as a double whammy, right? It's the impact of House Bill 2001 compliance, which allows these missing middle housing types, and the CFEC rules coming together. And just as a reminder to council, the CFEC rules have actually been in force in first edition for quite some time. Right. So your action tonight doesn't affect that in any way. I think you've heard me talk about this before, but in the long term, I think the question will become, if the private sector is not going to provide adequate parking, then what's the role of the public sector in providing parking? Certainly in our downtown, that was the original conception, right? Is there would be centralized parking and people would park once and then they'd walk to shops and restaurants. And so I do think that's also the question we've been asked in Lake Grove, right? Is should we build centralized parking? But I don't know that you're going to be able to say, oh, cottage clusters are not allowed anymore. You're still going to be required to do that. It is possible that over time, as we see how it plays out, the state might be interested in a less one-size-fits-all approach to parking, which is kind of what CFEC gives us, is a one-size-fits-all. I guess I am surprised because we've heard from other folks in other communities that cottage clusters that have gone in with no parking don't sell. So I think that's the other thing that was said today that I think is something we need to pay attention to, is whether there's an appetite to purchase a home with no on-site parking in Lake Oswego. I could see doing it in parts of Portland, but I agree with the testimony earlier that it's very difficult to live here without access to a car. So I wonder if the market might not be the thing that adjusts as opposed to the other way around.
Right.
Well, one thing that we did find out when we were putting the North Anchor project together, when it started, we had extremely tough parking requirements, and they built designs and so on for it. And then we took all the parking requirements away. There's still lots of parking at the hotel because they're not idiots. They're going to invest in a facility that's going to have plenty of parking because they want people to stay at the hotel. So free market rules sometimes, not always in Oregon, in fact, hardly ever, but free markets tend to help solve some of those problems. I guess back to the big picture, so really our only decision you really want is whether we support the $1,500 per parking spot or not. Is that what you want guidance from us for?
Right, not to support the idea of let's make people pay for parking, but just to have that as an option for compliance in addition to the tree canopy and the solar panels on site.
So that's the only thing we have to,
that's the only thing the Planning Commission left open for you. You still have the ultimate decision about whether you're going to adopt the ordinance or not.
right. And there's no way that we can skip that whole ordinance, is that correct? That part?
There is a significant risk that the city would be put out of compliance for all the reasons that City Manager Bennett had pointed out a moment ago, that we'd risk a number of things if we were to not comply with these rules. Yeah.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the 1,500?
So the 1,500, I would support it just to give another option. I think everyone knows me. I think this is just adding additional costs, and I'm all for the environment, don't get me wrong, but this is adding additional cost to building and development in Lake Oswego, and we keep trying to make things more affordable, and we keep adding more regulation to make things more expensive. So, and if that is the case, then I would say give the person building it the more options, the better. So I'm supportive, I guess. That would be A.
That would be alternative B, actually.
B.
Yeah.
B.
I agree with Councilor Wendland. I think as we're talking about here tonight, like, flexibility is the main theme as we go forward, and some of these regulations we're just kind of have to play out in the scenarios, and there are things that we can do locally to mitigate and make sure that we maintain a good safety, quality of life here. And but I think providing this flexibility is important. But I wanted to clarify, because it seems like we can maintain these funds here locally. We don't have to give them to
It's just a question of whether it would be efficient to do that.
No,
we have
if
solar
we can,
projects.
I
We're
would
putting
vote
solar
for
on all of our municipal buildings. I mean,
Yeah, it's just a question about whether it would be efficient for us to do that. You're going to accumulate, I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't see a huge number of very large parking lots being something that's going to be built in Lake Oswego in the near term. So, I mean, you could be talking about relatively small amounts of money.
exactly.
Yes, we could, but I don't know why we would.
Well,
A lot of
because the
the-
concern, that was the
Because,
concern.
again, I think it's about, you're increasing your administrative overhead costs. You're going to have to set up a new fund for Sean to track and a separate, and then you're going to have
we
to go
know
look for a
about Sean
project.
tracking the
I
funds.
just,
Oh, yeah.
I just think about Counselor Wendland's policy point, which is doing it, keeping it local is just going to add cost. So, I mean, you could do that.
Just to voice, that's the concern that the planning commission
I
had, so.
understand and I appreciate, I always like it when people want to make sure that we clean up our own messes, right? Which is what,
Yeah,
essentially,
and
that's what it is.
I think we'd all appreciate if there are ways to invest it locally, we'd prefer that in an efficient way, not if it's, I know we
I'm
always
certainly,
hear
if
that
that's
it's
what you guys want to do,
incredibly
it's
burdensome to
certainly
manage
okay. I'm just saying,
$50,000.
it's the least efficient of the options than just using the state program that's already set up and is already administered for those purposes. If we're talking about climate, if we're talking about global climate change, then actually the larger scale projects you can do, the better. So actually, that's why I say it could just be a lot more efficient to use the state's program. If you want to keep it local, of course, we'll figure it out. I just think,
Well, and I think it's good, these are not very large parking lots. A half acre is most parking lots in town, are 70 parking spots.
it's
is
just a question of how
mixed-use
many new
building.
ones you think you're going to get.
Yeah, it's going to be redevelopment, right, of sites. It's going to be redevelopment of properties. We don't have many greenfields, but it could be new multifamily, I mean, for certain I can think of a couple of projects that are coming down the pipeline that are going to fall under these rules. So I think providing that flexibility, to Councilor Wendland's point, is key. The other thing I wanted to, and Mr. Olson and I talked about this earlier, is if we could add that option to, and let's see what you all think about this, but to add the option to mix. So if you have your 30% and then your climate mitigation, if you can do, maybe getting to 40% canopy is not feasible on the site, but you can get to 20% canopy and then you do the fee for the rest, or you can get to, you can't do all the solar panels you need to achieve the kilowatt hours to, for the mitigation, but you could do some. What do you all think about doing some kind of mixed bag?
Option one, I mean.
More options.
More options, just more options, to provide more flexibility.
But how about our sister cities, like all of them, they adopted option one? We don't care. No, yeah, but, yeah, you don't care, but I care. I mean, we should do things that are.
We're having the discussion, you want to do what other cities are doing, or do you want to?
No, I'm not, no. And realistically, why like going 40%? Like on trees and then do as a thing, how about, maybe it's not fair. I followed the planning commission discussion, so you guys, you make your
Councilor
decision.
Corrigan.
Before we,
Eric, is the code written so you can mix and match, or is the code written that you have to pick one?
Staff recommended just allowing one option out of the three, but the state does allow a combination of options to be used to meet the requirement. Staff had tremendous concerns about actually quantifying these things and relaying them together. So the solar panels, the payment in lieu, and the tree canopy, they're not, apples to apples comparisons. They're very different. And so due to the sort of amount of work that would be required to even try to quantify this and sort of put these options in the code in a clear and objective way, we really did not recommend spending that much administrative effort on that.
So even if it was two options, if you were providing half the required canopy and you could mitigate the other half with the fee, be at the other half the spaces?
It's a bit strange because, the canopy requirement baseline is like 30% or trees along driveways. So we're not necessarily going to get 20% tree canopy, you know what I mean? That we could, but there's an increment there that's a bit different, and it is quite a big thought exercise that I think almost everybody that reviewed this code had massive concerns about being able to sort of mix and match, and just knowing that we're going to see proposals that are going to push that boundary, that if we don't quantify it and make that clear and objective, that are going to argue for, you know, the sort of smallest possible amount of various different things in ways that will force us to, you know, sort of really have to test that limit. So I think without having a clear and objective way to look at this, it's really concerning for staff.
The more complicated the code is, the more complicated the code is, both for developers and for staff, and for the public, frankly. So of course, if you want to try the mix and match, I understand where you're headed, but it does make it more complicated.
Yeah, no one would have to mix and match. You know, obviously they could do one.
Yeah, and I would guess that the majority of folks are going to pick the pay the state option. I mean, I just could be wrong, but it just seems so straightforward in terms of your development proposal.
And really, you know, we wanted to bring this to you earlier in the summer so that if that was the preference, then we could go back and say, okay, maybe we can try to make up some clear and objective standards that you could sort of mix and match and think of ways that could work. But at this point, that is not developed.
Okay, well, I agree with Ms. Bennett. I think that, so I was kind of thinking the mix and match, because otherwise everyone's just going to pay, you know. So, Councilor Corrigan.
I'd like to bring to everybody's attention that we have a real-life example of a parking lot like this in our city, and that is the Zupan's parking lot. It's easily a half acre, and I went through it yesterday and I counted the trees. There are 24 trees inside that parking lot, not even counting what's around the perimeter. And I'd like everybody to do a little thought experiment and imagine what that parking lot would look like without those trees.
I don't know if that parking lot is the best example of a great parking lot, period. It's
Well,
probably one of the worst designed parking lots in the history of parking lots, but I understand your point.
But they weren't
Right.
required to put those trees in anyway.
Were they or weren't they? No, they just have really great design. They did a
And
fantastic
most
job.
people landscape. Their
Yeah,
property.
and they did a good job, and that's real center of commercial activity in Lake Grove. So I concur with the Planning Commission. The thing that concerns me is that we're going to be left with a lot of asphalt and degradation, and the money's going to go to Salem with no mitigation. And I think we just did our tree code. We just did our urban, we didn't do our tree, we just did our community urban forest plan. This is a beautiful opportunity to implement it, and I would be very sorry to see us miss it. That's my 2 cents.
Well, it certainly doesn't preclude anyone from planting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we're hearing is that it's pretty quick and easy to send the $1,500 to Salem and leave the asphalt. And
I would just add that there is that baseline requirement for 30% tree canopy, so the climate mitigation options would be an additional
It's in addition
10%
to
to
that.
40%.
You still have to have 30% of your parking lot has to be treed.
I thought that
And
was
there's
on the
landscape
perimeter. Is
requirements.
that's on the perimeter, isn't it?
No,
You could put it on driveways, right?
could be anywhere, yeah. I mean, it's over the
It's-
parking lot.
The
yeah.
fee is on top of the amount of trees that are already going to be required.
So we're really only asking for another 10% with, is
Yeah.
that-
Yeah, I mean, if you,
understand that?
if you agree with the planning commission, obviously that's.
Yeah, I
what-
do agree with the planning
Yeah.
commission. I think that's more our brand.
Can I just ask, I see that the DLCD recognizes even that this 40% could be difficult to achieve. I can read that in their language. I mean, that's the thing. If this is not like an easy thing to do, and there's so many different variables for each site, and so that's why I keep coming back to the flexibility. Now DLCD, and I just, you know, without having to comb through every word of the code, you know, they incorporate into a definition that when you, the calculation you make for the canopy coverage is different than the calculation you make to arrive at that half acre threshold. So we've incorporated that into our code.
Well, yeah, we do define how to measure, you know, the different sort of areas for, you know, the surface parking areas for the purposes of this climate mitigation compliance.
And the canopy coverage includes the exterior landscaped areas. Like they said, they allow the canopy calculation is different than the half acre calculation.
So it's not the same as landscaping. The canopy, a lot of that will be over hardscape. So it's not the same as, you know, when you think of the percentage of landscaping requirement. Of course, you're going to have a softscape where you plant the tree, but the intent is really for there to be coverage over, you know, hardscape as well. So you can count all areas that are covered by the diameter of the tree at 15 years after planting, essentially, is how you calculate it.
Are we including a list of recommended trees to provide that canopy coverage?
We do have a list of recommended trees that we have for all sort of different purposes in the city, and yeah, it's not unique to parking lots, although there are certain recommendations and, for certain settings, for certain trees that work in those settings, as well as, certain trees that might work in other more softscape settings. So it's not unique to parking lot trees, I guess, but it does address that. Yeah.
Yeah, because you want the,
right tree, right place.
yeah. Just have a canopy. Councilor Afghan.
Mr. Mayor, I struggle with that 40% because Councilor Corrigan referred to zoo pens. I've been there many times, and I don't think they're even close to 40%. So I only imagine 40%, how many more trees has to go there in order to make it that. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to have a parking lot without any trees. So it's sort of like, do we add this in case the 40% is not possible? And I wasn't really in the camp of use this much of this option and that much of that option and totally you comply with the code. I was just looking at it as, okay, our bare minimum is the current code. If you can't take it this far, then you have to put money in the bank.
Right.
And I don't know if it's that simple, but the simpler we keep it, the better it is. But that 40% is a lot of coverage.
A lot of coverage.
Yeah, and you are looking at the actual surface of the parking itself. You're not looking at, this is sort of inclusive of all the different landscape areas. It is a different way to calculate it. So we do have concerns as staff that it would be hard for folks to meet that 40% requirement, and I think that would be another barrier to development in general if we kind of made it that sort of stringent of a requirement.
Well, and again, we're not, our town is not new. We are not building from scratch. Like Ms. Bennett said, this is very limited, very limited. And so I think it's, providing that flexibility is important. I did have, just sorry, one last question. The driveways, we just say plant along the driveways. Is that the standard, plant along the driveways?
That is, that's another option too. That's an alternative to that 30%, either plant along the driveways or 30% coverage. So that's, yeah.
Okay. It's not any more particular than that. It's just.
No, I mean, it does have, quite a few diagrams and different sort of ways to explain what is a driveway, what is a drive aisle, what is, and so we included those in the code amendments, trying to be as specific as possible. I don't know how much we want to get into those details, but it does say along driveways, and then there's a whole lot about what a driveway is. So,
I saw that, yeah, a lot more than ever thought possible. But it wouldn't interfere with line of sight and all that would be fine, meet those requirements, and then plant where you can type of thing. You want to make a motion?
Can I make a motion?
Yes, please.
I'd move to tentatively approve ordinance 2949 with the code amendments dated October 25th, 2024, and direct staff to return on December 17th, 2024, with a final version of the ordinance, including findings and conclusions for LU 24-0025. So that's option B.
So it includes the 1,500.
It includes the 1,500.
I second that.
All right, motion's been made by Councilor Wendland and seconded by Councilor Afghan. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a comment. I feel like there has been several neighbors who have come here and made a statement. I want them to know how I'm going to make my decision. First of all, this is a state mandate. I don't think I have the power to reject the state mandate. That's one boundary condition that I have right now. The other one is we keep talking about diversity, inclusion, and how do we bring different ethnicity, different income, different to City of Lake Oswego. And when we talk about parking versus putting roof over people's head, it's a challenge with the neighborhood, with the neighbors, and what do we need to do in order to bring people to our city and put roof over their heads. So that's the challenge that I have internally going on, but at the same time, the state has a mandate for us. And
Thanks, Councilor Afghan. Yeah, you know, and I think too, we all appreciate the goals of this policy. We're certainly all for enhancing the tree canopy, making sure that spaces that typically are commercial areas have the least canopies, so finding ways to enhance those, adding more street trees. Those are critical things that improve the overall health and livability of the community that we're all for. But we're also for ensuring that we're a place where people can come and invest and continue to redevelop and make our community even more attractive. And so we're balancing these different interests and trying to find that happy medium that brings them all together. And we're a successful community because of the communication between the city and between our neighborhood associations and our business associations. And so we just have to maintain this communication as we go forward to this time where we do have new policies coming together, both on the housing front and now on the climate-friendly, equitable communities front in regards to this parking. Is just going to require that we continue doing what we always do, talking to each other, keeping our eyes open, and adjusting as we go forward. We've been very successful doing that. All right, let's, Ms. Linda, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck,
Yes.
Counselor Boot,
Yes?
Counselor Ruff. Yes. Counselor Corrigan,
Yes.
Counselor Afghan,
yes.
and Counselor Winland.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Olson. Thank you, Ms. Rooney. Lots of years of work. How many children did you have during this time? Just one. Okay, well, seemed like more.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, everyone. who
But he's
came
in
to provide
college.
testimony. Okay, we're going to take a brief recess. Okay, we're back in order. Next item on the agenda is item 9.1. This is a study session on the 2025 master fees and charges. Director Cross, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, councilors. I'm Sean Cross, the Finance Director. Here we are at our annual pilgrimage of the master fees and charges for the study session. I'm going to start, really there isn't too much to this from the last year. We're not adding a whole bunch of things. There's only one table we're adding that was brought on the October 15th study session with business license, and I'll get to, there's a slide for that, so we'll talk about that later. That's really the only change in like structure or anything like that. Everything else is just really increased by different indices. So here I have this kind of the ones we kind of primarily use, like the Western Region, BC, that's our main one. It was 2.6 this year. And then the construction cost index for 20 cities is our other primary one we use, which was only 1%. Anyway, so here's how the CPI has changed over the last 10 years. The blue one pretty much is, how it changed annually, it kind of indicates that. And then the red one is the 10-year average. You'll notice that the 10-year average is 3%, and you'll notice that most of the time when we do our budgets that we use 3%. And this is kind of why, because it kind of averages out. And then I'll spend the majority of the time talking about the changes in the utilities and how the fees will kind of look over the next 5 years, just like I have for the past, 10, 13, 14 years. So we'll start with stormwater. Probably the biggest change to stormwater is, previously we had been changing or asking for a 7% increase. This year we only asked for a 3% increase. A lot of that had to do with the stormwater fund was the one that was by far the most underfunded of the 4 utilities. And we had our Clean Streams plan was telling us we needed to increase it by 7% to be able to do some capital. So what you can kind of see right now is at the end of how we're projecting at the end of fiscal year 25, the one that we're currently in, we should end the year, a little over $6 million as a fund balance. That allows us to do some projects. But you can kind of see here, the red line indicates it's the ending fund balance of the year. It goes up. A lot of this is because we don't know a lot of the projects in the out years because it ties so closely with the street fund. With the Dig Once policy, we end up doing a lot of stormwater projects during that. So the first couple of years, we kind of know what projects are going to cost, but in the out years, we don't. So you can kind of see we are sticking around the 6%. And as we get out here with the CIP at this point, we feel the fund balance will be here. My suggestion is we stay at the 3%, though, until we get to doing a new master plan for this, and then that'll get a new rate plan. But the master plan will get all the projects that we need to do over the next 20, 30 years, and so that'll give us a better idea in a rate study. So anyways, that's kind of a bigger change for the stormwater as it went from 7 to 3%. That'll be the longest I talk about any of these slides. The street fund. This one, we're increasing by 2%. That's by a resolution that was passed, I think 2018. Said that there was a floor of 2% and a ceiling of 8% based on the 20 cities construction cost index. It was 1%, so we're going with the floor of 2%. What you kind of see is one counselor did call me today, Counselor Corrigan, and asked me a question of why all these numbers didn't add up. If you kind of look at our net operations, this is like, what we have left. This is what we're, then our capital, and then here's our beginning balance or ending balance. What this doesn't put into it is if we either have debt or there's a transfer from the general fund. The street fund gets $2 to $3 million every year from the general fund to do projects. That's not really part of operating income, and it's not. So that's why it doesn't completely tie out. But with the transfers, they're all calculated in here. This is kind of where we're looking. And having it at $4 million is really good. That gives us about a $3 million capital reserve and $1 million operating reserve. The sewer fund, based on some different modeling that we did for doing the wastewater project and working with Portland and BS in particular, and working with that project, it was determined that we needed about a 3.9% increase in the future years to actually be able to do the project and keep that where we're going. So that's the 3.9% is in here. What isn't in this is the project itself, the wastewater project, because we don't know exactly how much it's going to cost or when, and the revenue, the debt that we're doing to actually do the project also isn't in here. We'll add them when they're there. But if we put a price in here, my biggest concern is if we throw a price in there, that'll be exactly what the cost of the project will be. We won't have a whole lot of competition for the price, so we don't really want to throw a price in here right now. But as you can see, we're keeping it, the project, the fund balance at about above $10 million. Then the water fund, the big change in this one is according to the water master plan that was done and the different projects in the CIP and starting in fiscal year 27 through 29, there's a lot of extra smaller projects that are coming in there. But you can see the red line jumps up right there, and that is because we'll issue debt at that time, some full faith and credit debt that is planned for it, depending on if the CIP doesn't get shifted out a year or something like that, then we won't. But it still works with the 2% increase that is planned in there. So this is kind of one of my favorite slides of this, is because it does show how so this is just basically the annual water bill consumption by single-family dwellings, multifamily, and then commercial and irrigation. And what it shows is the ones that have the tiered system that was put in here in 2009 versus the ones that are flat, they really haven't really changed much. There's a little in weather and that kind of stuff. And you kind of see here with the weather, but even with the increase in population and buildings in Lake Oswego, with the tiered system, we're still actually conserving water more than we did back here. Probably like a 5,000 higher population. But here's what the increases that we're looking at: 2% for water, 3.9% for sewer. It averages 3% for the water bill, or for the utility bill, and about $5.79 on the average. No one is average because our average water is, I think we use 10 units of water on average, but in the summer it's more, in the winter it's less. Sewer is 8 units. Some people use more, some people use less, so it'll affect everyone slightly differently. But on the average, it's about $5.79. And then in the next year, as we're looking out, the rates for the utilities are we kind of know what we need because of how the capital is coming along. That's really the driver for it. So we know that our modeling is 2% for water. Those are what we need. But street is the one that's actually tied to a construction cost index. And again, we're just kind of using the average of 3% in the out year. But again, this is the column that right here is what is in the actual master fees and charges this year. And then for the big change is business license. And this was from your study session, like I said, like in October, moving away from just the two different kinds of rates for one for renewal, one for new, and just going to one, and then adding another level, down here, and then increasing the fees as was suggested at study session. And in doing this, I think it increases revenue by about $200,000. Okay, maybe 4 minutes was good, but.
Wow. All right.
Good, yeah.
Questions for Director Cross? Councilman Booth.
No, my question, Sean, was like why the consumption of water is, what makes that in the beginning and now we have less? What's the rationale? Why? We are more people here and yeah.
I believe it has to do with their tier water system. It's actually working for what it was designed for back in 2009 when it was passed by the council back then. We had a plant that could produce 16 million gallons a day just for Lake Oswego. We were getting close to that production in the summertime. And so, there was a new plant being built. We have a little bit more capacity for Lake Oswego, but we also, it's a dual plant with Tigard. But there was that, so we have a little more capacity, but at the same time, it was just trying to get the conservation.
Okay.
Right.
Good.
Inland.
Just a quick question. Do you think we, as our chief financial officer, are you comfortable with the reserve numbers based on the recent inflationary consequences we've had in the last 4 years on the increased costs? Do you think we have enough in reserves for the emergencies so that our city engineer can sleep at night so that she knows if something happens, she has money that she can spend?
Yes. I mean, out of all of them, the one that was probably the one that in the past years would be the hardest one was probably the street fund, because we used to get that down to closer to $1 million, $1.5 million was our reserve. So actually having about a $3 million capital reserve, if there's a landslide again, if there's, something happens, it actually, yeah. I mean, the short answer is yes, and we just have a lot more ability to pay for things.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Afghan.
Director, on the street funds, what does 1% equates to? Going to your table on street.
This.
There. So we were, you're suggesting 2% this coming year and then 3% the following year.
Yes.
1% difference, how much does that equate to, dollar-wise? Approximately.
I think we get about 4.5 million from it, so 1% would be 45,000.
Okay.
I'm just saying what I think it's going to be on the street fund. And the other three, we've modeled that out for 20 years, and we know what capital we think is going to happen. Things move because things break and other things come up, so capital moves around. But based on our capital requirements, even the sewer one's kind of being driven by, a lot of it's the debt from the lowest, but the next one is because of the wastewater plant that's being designed and built. Water is, again, debt, and that's all modeled out, but that's flat, so that's why it's not going at 3, it's going at 2. Stormwater, we're good, but street is the only one that it increases by an index, and I just think it's going to be 3%. If it was 2%, I think we'd be fine. I don't think $45,000 is going to change the capital that much for 1 year.
Yeah, the delta isn't that much difference. What I was thinking was in the same line of thought that Councilor Whitland has. If we continue having these major weather impacts on our streets, are we going to be able to keep up with it, or what's our risk?
Yeah, I think so. I think we kind of calculated a couple times what we thought the cost of one of these winter events were, and they're, depending on, the one 3 years ago, when we had, the one last year, just based on what we've sent to FEMA and what the money, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They're kind of between $500,000 to $1 million. And with a $3 million capital reserve, I think we're doing all right.
And absorb that. Thank you so much.
All right, Dr. Koss, thank you very much. Yeah, good
So
presentation.
I guess my direction I need is, do any changes? Because I'm going to come back in 2 weeks at a public hearing to approve this. Is there any changes that you would like?
I did not see any. Did anyone see any changes? No, it all looked good to me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Smooth hearing in 2 weeks. All right, information from council. Well, Councilor Boop and I were at the tree lighting ceremony. The team did a great job.
But you need to ask the mayor to read his poem here. No,
We had a good, it was the biggest crowd I have ever seen
it was
in
crazy.
the park. I don't know how, thousands of people. I mean, you couldn't even move. It was
30,000 people.
30, like the whole town. The whole town was there.
The whole town.
No, but they did a great job, and they've got the stage moved back now. It's actually next to the tree that we're lighting instead of on the other end of the park, and it was just, they did a really nice job. I mean, it was great to see all those folks downtown. And surprisingly, we were talking with the, Youth Leadership Council, and a lot of them were saying it said, oh, we'd never even heard of the tree light. I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. And I put like an informal, pull out on social media, and a lot of people like haven't been. I was like, oh, but I mean, there's so many people. But it's growing, seems like each year, like all of our other events. Because I remember it wasn't only a few years ago, we were speaking to like a scattered 6 folks. Councilor Bowe.
No, I just want to shout out for parks and recreation. Best, honestly, best. Even the market, the reunion market was also a big success. So honestly, it means you're doing a great job. So thank you, Martha. You have great people working this year.
And we had the Lake Oswego reindeer there.
Yes. They were reindeers.
They were really.
Yeah, they were very cool.
Did you see them fly?
Oh, almost. I was with, they do it after everybody leaves.
They flew in at 3:30.
And the question, how was the first Christmas tree brought to Lake Oswego for the tree lighting? How was it? On a carriage or a truck or a helicopter? In 1964.
Does anyone know how the first Santa arrived?
Oh,
we're around,
Santa, Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I almost.
No, almost nothing.
67 was my
Senior
first
in high
one.
school.
67 was the first one. I was in kindergarten.
So how did it come here?
It came by fire truck.
Came by helicopter.
Helicopter.
You won't believe it, yeah.
Really?
Helicopter. Yeah, so.
Got a lot of work to do tonight, guys.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up.
This is the most interesting thing we've done all night.
Long time tonight.
Councilor Corrigan.
I have an update on the South Shore Fire Station Task Force, and they have been on the move, touring recently built fire stations. They visited the Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue on McEwen and Clackamas Fire in Oregon City, number 16. And I'd also like to thank the crews at TBF&R and Clackamas Fire. They were very generous with their time in sharing their experiences as the task force moves forward. We learned an awful lot from them about what they thought they were going to get when they built the fire stations and then what they actually got, which is very, very valuable information. So we're very grateful. And there's another meeting of the task force on Thursday.
Thank you, Councilor Corrigan. I appreciate your updates and for serving on that task force. It's great. Okay, Ms. Bennett. All right, with that, we're going to adjourn the City Council meeting and call to order the Redevelopment Agency meeting. First item on the agenda tonight is a public hearing on LORA Resolution 24-03. This will be presented by Ms. Osnak, who will also start by reviewing the hearing procedures for us, although.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Buck, members of the council. Now is the time set for a public hearing on the public contracting rules that you have already heard. It's a legislative policy decision within your sound discretion. We will have a public hearing process, but I don't see anybody, at least in here, that will be testifying. And we'll begin with a very brief presentation from me. And I'll ask, once again, if there are any financial conflicts of interest. Seeing none, I assume from the prior hearing that that is the same. So just as a reminder, this resolution is designed to do three things. First, it's designed to allow the LORA Council to quickly, efficiently, and most importantly, economically hire legal counsel for emergent matters. It does not require LORA Council, me, to do that. It simply allows me to do it in those circumstances where it's appropriate and or if LORA were involved in litigation and, for example, we were ordered to mediation. That's not a situation where we're allowed to select from any mediator. We're typically given a couple of mediators. So, and most other cities have this special procurement exemption, and so I think that's a fine addition to our contracting rules. The second thing that it does is it increases the contract signing authority of the city manager, and that is designed to streamline the matters that come before council, and it includes a reporting requirement to you all, just so you know which contracts are in that amount. And then the third thing it does is a technical housekeeping fix to our intergovernmental agreements to allow us also to, the city manager, to sell as, in addition to her current authority, which is simply to purchase via an IGA. So those are the three things that it does, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Osnack? All right, thank you for the report. We'll open the public hearing, and seeing there's no one on Zoom. No? Okay. We're going to close the public hearing, and we'll entertain a motion.
Move to adopt LORA Resolution 24-03.
All right, motion made by Councilor Boop and seconded by Councilor Afghan. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. I should have said member. I forgot member and Boop. Okay. It's fine. Motion passes 6-0. We also have on the agenda approval of LORA meeting minutes from October 15th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve the LORA meeting minutes as written?
Move. Go ahead. Go. Second.
All right, motion made by member Afghan and seconded by member Winland. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 6-0. All right, at this point, we are going to adjourn the redevelopment agency meeting and reconvene the city council meeting. The city council is now going to meet in executive session. Ms. Osnack, will you please read the legal parameters for us?
Yes, thank you. The discussion that we are going to have in there, or anything that is said in there. And with that, I think we're ready.
Wonderful. Okay, well, we are going to recess and we'll reconvene in the side room.
We're not coming back, right?
And we're not coming back. This will conclude the broadcast portion. All two of you, go to bed. Jeff, go to bed.
Do something fun.
It's definitely not Jeff.